Argentina is a very special country for the VisualPolitik family. It is by far one of the countries to which we have dedicated the most videos and the most time. Many times we've been pessimistic, but this time in this video, what we're going to tell you can be summed up with one word: hope. Time is flying by. It seems incredible, but Argentine President Javier Milei is about to celebrate his first year in office. A year that has been characterized by strong budget adjustments, many reforms, and the blender going at full power. In the land of the gaucho, many things seem to be taking a 180-degree turn. But there is something that is not usually given much attention, and is yet perhaps one of the brightest points of this new era. Many of you may not know this, but a year ago, this was the day-to-day life of Argentines.
Gasoline shortage continues and long lines at gas stations. It is not yet known when the supply will be normalized. Fall in fuel production, one of the reasons behind the shortage.
Well, these days, after eliminating several regulations on the hydrocarbon sector, some see Argentina as the next Latin American Saudi Arabia. Well, okay, maybe that title is better left to Brazil. So let's say Argentina could be the new Norway or the next Latin American Texas, at least as far as hydrocarbons are concerned. Yes, that's right, and no, I promise you, I haven't lost my mind. The land of tango, soccer, and steakhouses could also become one of the next meccas of black gold and natural gas. Take note of this because it could spell a real turning point for Europe.
For the first time in 5 years, fuels are lowered. YPF and Shell cut 1% the price of gasoline and 2% the price of gasol as from tomorrow.
Argentina could be able to replace, with very attractive conditions, a large proportion of the gas that Europe stopped buying from Russia. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Oil production is at levels not seen in 16 years. It's true that it did begin to shoot up shortly after the pandemic, even with the Fernandez government in power, but now Milei could end up giving it the big push, the definitive push that this sector needs. At least, that is what has been proposed. Take a look at this graph.
According to data from the International Energy Agency, the Argentine oil sector is going against the usual trend in Latin America. It is not that they will be able to reach the levels of the Persian Gulf countries or even Brazil. But check this out. It's expected that by 2030, Argentina could surpass Colombia and Guyana, and a few years later, it could approach Mexico's production levels.
And pay attention because, as we'll see, the greatest treasure is not oil, but natural gas. The Casa Rosada, Argentina's White House, is now a hotbed of economic measures, pro-market policies, and reformers of all kinds. Therefore, here on VisualPolitik, we've asked ourselves several questions. Are we witnessing the birth of a new kind of Saudi Argentina? Is this oil awakening solely the work of Javier Milei? Could oil end up saving the Argentine Republic? What could this mean for Europe? Well, stay tuned for what we're going to tell you coming up. So, step on the gas and let's get started. Talk about oil in Argentina practically centers around Vaca Muerta. Vaca Muerta is a geological formation located in the center-west of the country. This is a basin that, although discovered almost 100 years ago, its great potential was not seriously appreciated until 2011 at the earliest. And VisualPolitik community, this is no laughing matter. This is the location of what is believed to be the second largest shale gas and fourth largest shale oil reserves on the planet. In other words, we're talking about a type of resource whose extraction requires the use of a method that is as famous as it is controversial. We are, of course, talking about fracking. And just imagine what this means for a nation that is starving for dollars. We could be talking about a real turning point, a truly critical juncture. Vaca Muerta is a great beacon of hope. Of course, the problem is that this has been going on for a long time with no apparent results. Let's take a moment, however, because now in the midst of Milei's major reforms, this issue seems to be becoming more important than ever. Vaca Muerta could finance a good chunk of the efforts being made by the Argentine government to control debt and inflation and to make the economy grow again. And this is not something we've come up with. Milei himself says so.
Argentina tiene un suelo bendecido con abundantes y variados recursos naturales. Miremos el sector energético. Vaca Muerta es una fuente de recursos extraordinaria. Su desarrollo ha logrado revertir nuestro histórico déficit energético de casi 7.000 millones de dólares hace 10 años a un superávit de 4.000 millones de dólares en el primer semestre de este año.
In a short time, this country could become a major supplier of liquefied natural gas to Europe, which of course would mean a massive influx of billions of dollars. Just remember that Vaca Muerta's gas reserves alone are estimated at around 9 trillion cubic meters of gas, compared to Europe's annual consumption of just over 300 billion cubic meters. In other words, it would not be impossible that, in a few years, Argentina could be supplying a large part of the gas that the old continent devours. This would be terrible news for Russia. But it's not just a matter of dollars that would stop flowing out and new ones that would start flowing in, but of what this deposit could also mean in terms of competitiveness for Argentine industry. A country that, thanks to its enormous gas resources, could have abundant and cheap energy on a virtually unlimited basis. Because, hold on to your chair, if we were to take into account only the current consumption rate, the reserves of this field would be equivalent to more than 60 years of domestic oil consumption and more than 200 years of domestic gas consumption. That is no trivial matter. And of course, we're only talking about this Vaca Muerta basin. Argentina's total resources are potentially larger. Do you now understand the enormous importance of this topic? Well, this is precisely why the trend shows that oil investments in Argentina have started to abandon projects in other parts of the country to focus on the Vaca Muerta basin in Neuquén. But wait a minute, we just told you that the enormous potential of this deposit was discovered in 2011. That's more than 10 years ago. So how is it possible that it's taken so long to start exploiting this enormous wealth in earnest? And even more inexplicable, how could this have happened in a country that has been on the brink of economic abyss for many years now? Wouldn't it have made sense to have bet big on exploiting this wealth from day one? Well, let's see what exactly happened in Argentina and what changes Milei is now making so that in the next few years, Argentina could become the new Qatar of Latin America. Listen up.
The Dark Harvest.
Sometimes things are very straightforward. If you plant corn, you harvest corn. And if you make bad decisions, things go badly, period. Well, in the land of tango, the energy crisis was the chronicle of a death foretold following more than a decade of absolutely disastrous policies for the sector. And for all of us to understand this point, this time we have to look back. Of course, we don't have to go very far back.
Riquezas hidrocarburíferas, si las quiero usar para algo, si las quiero regalar, no. Pero si las quiero usar en beneficio del pueblo que represento, el manejo día a día de esa producción tiene que estar en manos del propio Estado.
The old dogma of 21st century socialism that was dominant for years in this region of the world. What is really important? What makes money? Always in the hands of the state, and by extension in the hands of the politicians, lest they be left without their own piece of the pie. This is what caused Cristina Fernández de Kirchner, then president of Argentina and now leader of the opposition, to start an interventionist crusade against the Spanish oil company Repsol in 2012. At that time, this Spanish oil company held the majority of the shares in Yacimientos Petrolíferos Fiscales, the historic Argentine oil company popularly known as YPF. Well, the issue is that Kirchnerism forced the expropriation of YPF's shares in order to nationalize the company in an irregular manner. The problem? Well, besides being a painful decision for the hydrocarbon sector in Argentina, they violated everything that could be violated. Investment protection agreements, the rules for listing on foreign stock exchanges, and even the company's own bylaws. For example, they stipulated that in the event that an entity acquired a majority shareholding, that is, more than 50% of the shares, it would have to carry out an offer for tender for 100% of the shares. And this was not done by the Kirchnerist government. They simply went after Repsol's shareholding by force. It was a clear blackmail operation. No matter what happens, we're going to take the company away from you.
Tengamos en claro que las empresas que están aquí, aun cuando sus accionistas sean extranjeros, las empresas radicadas aquí son empresas argentinas.
Obviously, despite all this, Repsol did not stand idly by and instead defended itself. It demanded $10 billion from the Argentine state, and in the end, they agreed to a compensatory payment of $5 billion. But that was not the end of the drama. The minority shareholders sued Argentina for this intervention, and in early 2024, a Manhattan court judgment ordered the Argentine government to pay out $16 billion. This sentence is being appealed, and we'll see what happens. But what is clear clear is that the nationalization of YPF, besides costing the Argentines a lot of money, did not serve to accelerate the exploitation of Vaca Muerta. In other words, it was a disaster. Now, some of you may be thinking, why on earth are you telling me this? Why is this important for the future of the new Qatari Argentina? Well, you see, the key point is that this whole mess happened months after the discovery of the Vaca Muerta wells. Coincidence? Not a chance. What happened is that the Argentine government saw its opportunity to completely control the reserves of a macro oil and gas field, and they went for it. The problem is that at the same time, they sent a terrifying message to oil companies all around the world. Do not invest in Argentina. It's true that some companies such as Chevron, Shell, and ExxonMobil did end up taking the risk, but they did so in dribs and drabs. And not only that, but there's also the country risk. For example, it skyrocketed following the nationalization of YPF, something that of course affected the entire Argentine economy. In other words, a disaster. But let's not get sidetracked. The fact is that since then, the now state-owned YPF has increased its production of black gold. But as I said, don't think it's been impressive. Remember, YPF was expropriated in 2012, and since then, years have gone by and production has barely increased. It was only in 2022 that it began to grow somewhat, and we aren't exactly talking about an oil revolution. You know, the efficiency and productivity pace of the government-owned sector. In fact, such was the extent of the nonsense that, faced with the inability to increase domestic production of crude oil and gas, the Casa Rosada had to start importing gas, despite having what is estimated to be one of the largest reserves on the entire planet. Crazy.
Cada uno de esos barcos que ingresaron a la Argentina trayendo gas fueron cientos de puestos de trabajo de argentinos que perdimos, cuando nosotros tenemos el gas. Con lo cual es como inexplicable por qué hicimos algo en contra de nosotros mismos.
Former right-wing president Mauricio Macri, who was president between 2015 and 2019, tried to fix this whole mess, but there weren't too many results, at least not during the following years. And then in 2019, that rare Argentine leftist fascist ideology known as Peronism returned to power. And what did they do? Well, they got their hands back on the oil industry.
Porque no vamos a permitir que sobre la base de incrementar un poquito más su ganancia exportando, terminen perjudicando a los consumidores argentinos.
To harm Argentine consumers. That's pretty funny when we remember that we're talking about a country where there have been long queues precisely because of the scarcity of gasoline. In short, this is how Argentina has been for decades. The fact is that the Peronist government forced the oil companies to sell more to the domestic market and to export less. In other words, it forced oil companies to sell fuel at fixed and regulated prices in Argentina and prohibited them from exporting large quantities. Obviously, this limited their profits and reduced their willingness to invest a single dollar in this industry. It was a kind of feast today and famine tomorrow. The result? The oil production sector began to decapitalize, and there was limited money for investing in new developments to increase production. In fact, this is what explains in large part why, for many years, production has risen following the discovery of Vaca Muerta, but only very slightly. But then, suddenly, everything blows up, and this man appears on the scene, Javier Milei.
YPF announced that in November it will start up the first RIGI project with an investment of $2.5 billion. The state-controlled oil company, together with Vista, Pan American Energy, Pampa Energia, Chevron and Shell, will build a pipeline from Vaca Muerta to Rio Angro that will double oil exports.
Those of you who are watching us from outside Argentina may be wondering what the hell RIGI is. Well, RIGI is the first bet of the libertarian government to radically change the Argentine oil paradigm. And guess what? It could be working. Listen up.
Two birds with one stone.
Pay close attention to this news story because it is the beginning of a gigantic change.
After 14 years, Argentina will again have a surplus energy trade balance, excluding the months of the pandemic. It will export more energy than it will import for an estimated total of $5 billion.
Milei has proposed a strong deregulation of the hydrocarbons market. For example, the elimination of barriers to oil and gas exports and mandatory quotas for the domestic market. Incidentally, he has also greatly reduced government intervention in fuel prices. And not only that, the Argentine president has also made sure that some of these changes will last not just a few few years, but several decades. Remember the ley de bases? Well, this law has a chapter that is directly concerned with oil. This is known as the incentive regime for large investments, which in Spanish gives us the acronym RIGI. Now, what exactly is this, and how will it affect the new Qatari Argentina? RIGI basically establishes benefits and legal guarantees for all energy investments exceeding $600 million. $600 million US dollars. The companies that invest more than the amount of money in Argentina will have a reduction in income tax, accelerated refund of VAT credit balances, the elimination of withholding taxes for its exports, an import duty exemption for capital goods, and unrestricted access to the foreign exchange market. And this is just the main points, because there are many more minor measures within this set of rules. Now, many of you will say, well, it's all very well to promote investments and provide incentives, but naturally, after what has been seen in Argentina in recent years, confidence must be at rock bottom. Well, are investors really trusting Milei? And what would happen if Peronism returns in 2027? Well, here's the catch. RIGI has a lifespan of no less than 3 decades by legal mandate. Listen up.
The tax, customs, and exchange stability established, as well the regulatory stability, will be enforced during the 30 years following the date of approval.
In order to provide stability to investors, the Argentine state will not be able to touch these benefits for a long time. Although it is true, these measures could be eliminated with a sufficient parliamentary majority to do so. But if that happens, the Argentine state would almost certainly face lengthy legal proceedings and unaffordable indemnities. So this reform seems to be here to stay.
In fact, many analysts compare this measure to Chile's Decree Law 600, which was in effect from 1974 to 2015, and which allowed its huge mining industry to develop. Or Peru's 1992 mining law, which sealed 15 years of tax stability also for the mining sector. In other words, there are precedents in the region that have worked. That is why it's possible that the plan will work.
And keep in mind that we're talking about a total paradigm shift. On the one hand, the obsession with price control and self-sufficiency seems to have been banished for 3 decades. Meanwhile, something that has been punishing the economy in Argentina for decades, and which is the mother of all evils, has been greatly reduced: legal uncertainty. Now the question is it working? Well, it's still too early to see clear results, because this new regime has only been in force for a few months. But even in such a short time, there's already reason for optimism and hope. Take a look at this chart. Similar levels have not been seen since 2015. Obviously, there's still a long way to go to reach historical highs, but in just 1 year of government, more oil is already being exported than in any year we look at during the presidencies of Macri or Alberto Fernandez. And that, my friends, is a milestone in itself. And that's not all. On top of that, in the last few months, a lot of news has been coming in about big investments that will be able to exploit and export the country's immense natural gas reserves. News like this.
Golar seals 20-year agreement to deploy FLNG in Argentina.
Golar is perhaps the world's leading company in offshore liquefaction infrastructure management. Well, as of 2027, it will have this vessel capable of processing for export some 4 billion cubic meters of gas per year, $1 billion business. And of course, this is just the beginning. VisualPolitik community, if the sector continues at this pace, Milei could reach the end of his term with oil and natural gas production soaring and tens of billions of dollars entering the Argentine economy each year. Dollars that Argentina needs more than ever in order to stabilize inflation, clean up the central bank's accounts, and who knows, even dollarize the economy. Let's just say that Argentina, which already had the reserves, now also has a much better legal framework for this oil miracle to take place. Of course, we must be careful, because it's not just a matter of pricking the ground and black gold sprouts up. It's one thing to have oil, and quite another to be an oil-producing country. A great deal of investment is needed at all levels.
For starters, it would have to adapt and expand its ports to be able to export much larger quantities of oil and gas. Ports such as Bahia Blanca already export oil, but to climb to the level of oil and gas superpower would require massive investments in new marine terminals and gas liquefaction plants. Additional oil and gas pipelines and freight rail networks that can move all of this across the country would also need to be built.
We would like to be able to say otherwise, but for now, that is far from the case. This is something that will take years to achieve, that will cost a lot of money, and will depend on the confidence that investors have in all the reforms that are being made in the medium and long term. But for the moment, as I said, there is a lot of good news. Of course, it's now necessary for these changes to materialize, and also for much more news like this to come in.
6th RIGI project. PAE submitted proposal to export LNG and total investment pledges amount to $7.9 billion.
To give you an idea, just to set up the necessary infrastructure to export liquefied natural gas to the whole world, the turnover would be in the billions.
Argentina needs investments for 46.4 billion euros to export LNG.
Evidently, the idea of Milei's people is that this money should come from the private sector. But after so many years of distrust due to Kirchner's savages, this is not going to be an easy task. But at least, as I said, the first projects are already getting underway. For the time being, hydrocarbon exports are growing, mainly to neighboring countries such as Paraguay, Brazil, and Bolivia. There's still a long way to go until we can speak of a global oil giant, and a lot of money still needs to come into the country in the form of investments. And that, precisely, will be the great challenge. But as we all know, Rome wasn't built in a day. No one expects Argentina to fix itself overnight and become a world power in the blink of an eye. Nobody, starting with Milei himself.
In 20, 30, or 40 years at the latest, Argentina is going to be the world's leading power.
Evidently, Milei exaggerates. Argentina is not going to be the world's leading power in 20 or 40 years, but what matters here is the long-term vision. The country now has the opportunity to become a healthy and relatively advanced economy, as long as Argentines don't fall into the same old traps. The course seems to be the right one for the moment, at least in this matter, but we'll see if they manage to reach their destination. Of course, on VisualPolitik, we'll be keeping a very close eye on everything that happens in Argentina, one of our favorite countries. But while that's being defined, it's your turn. Do you think Argentina will be able to become an oil and gas power in the long term? Will Milei be able to lay the foundations for black gold and gas in order to bring Argentina the dollars it needs to restore its economy? Well, leave us your thoughts below in the comments and let the debate begin. Oh, and very important, if you like this video, don't forget to give it a like, subscribe to VisualPolitik, and activate the little bell so you don't miss any news. As always, thank you very much for watching. All the best. See you next time.